So scenario one, based on the disruptive child being in the principal's office, first and foremost, I'd want the parents to come in and I would like them to basically explain where they're coming from. I would, greet them. I'd have them come sit down and I'd say, thank you for coming in. Please, feel free to express your concerns now. I feel like a lot of times we really do want to build that school and home community and partnership. And I feel like the best way to do that is making sure that the parents feel heard. So I would give them time to do that. And then from there, I would say, okay, thank you. Let's now look deep into this further and go over a few things. And I would pull out the contact log. So on Infinite Campus is what the site we use. You have a contact log of what time you called, and parent communications, what it was over, etc. I would pull out the contact logs that we have for our school based on this issue, and I would go through, okay, you were called here and here based on this behavior, and then it didn't change. So we are moving forward in this. And then I would go into, first and foremost, sports is a privilege, it's not a right. This is a school sanctioned activity that's an extracurricular activity, which can be taken away just as easily as anything else in our building. And so then I would just let them know, that is something that I can take away as a principal. And I would then like to look at the code of conduct, and I would pull it out. And by law, every student does get a copy of the code of conduct, and I would pull it out. And for state laws, which I wouldn't go over these with the parents because most parents aren't going to care about state law, but there is a Colorado law 22-32 -1091, which is just the Board of Education specific powers and a safety school plan. And it says a concisely written conduct and discipline code that shall be enforced uniformly, fairly, and consistently for all students. And I might point that out just because it says consistently for all students. And then it also states that a copy needs to be given to each student for enrollment. And then there's another law, 22-33-201, that just tries to avoid expulsion at all possible, and trying to find different laws out there, or different disciplinary actions out there, so that way students aren't being expelled, and trying to make a different behavioral plan. But I would pull out the code of conduct, and in the code of conduct, it states that the principal may suspend or recommend expulsion of a student who engages in one or more of the following activities. And in those activities, there are two that I found that this student met. It's throwing objects unless part of a supervised school activity that can cause bodily injury or damage property. And then the second was repeated interference with the school's ability to provide educational opportunities to other students. Now, I would go over this with the parent. You did not meet number 17 because your child threw a notebook across the room. And secondly, the repeated interference of the school's ability to provide educational opportunities by the teacher having to constantly stop and talk to your student about behavior. Now you're disrupting the learning of the students around you. So due to that, I can suspend this student because it is stated in the handbook. Then I would then take it to page 32 of the same handbook from Pueblo City Schools. And it says that teachers and administrators shall be expected to hold students strictly accountable for their failure to obey standards of conduct outlined in the board policy. So it's my job to hold the student accountable. It also says that administrators, teachers, and parents and students shall be responsible for maintaining an atmosphere of acceptable and consistent discipline at all times while engaging and performing in their duties and responsibilities. That students are expected to follow the disciplinary policies and regulations by the school board, and is required to administer and enforce the discipline policies by me through this time. It says that a teacher or any other person acting in good faith and in compliance with the discipline code adopted by the school board shall be immune from criminal prosecution or civil liability unless the person is acting willfully or wantonly. And so there basically saves me from getting in trouble from the behavior. But I would just go over this code of conduct that they had signed, and say, hey, this is what you did and this needs to be followed. And then if that's not working, I would give an example of another student acting out. Theoretically, I wouldn't use a real example of real students, but I would give a theoretical example of, okay, if student A did this to your child, you would want me to take action. So to be fair, now I need to take action for your student or your child, not following this behavior. And most importantly, just stick to your decision. Not everybody's going to be happy with it, and if the parents are frustrated, that's on the parents. But it's our job to make sure that there's safety in our schools, and that the discipline actually being followed. So based on that, that is what I would do for scenario 1. So for scenario 2 on Mrs. Guzman's unflattering words on the initiative and to the principal, first and foremost, this is very broad, so it was harder, I feel, to make an exact timeline and an exact plan because you don't know based on each step. You can go one of two ways, essentially. But first and foremost, since it says that there are rumors of her saying this and you haven't necessarily heard it yourself, the first thing I would do is call her into my office, and just kind of ask her about it. I wouldn't jump the gun and start assuming and start ranting and raving. Obviously, you need to hold a professional manner, but I would just ask her what her concerns are, what she's been saying, etc. Especially because she has not said anything during the staff meetings. And I would give her a chance to speak. As you already know, I feel like that's very important. From there, then looking at different regulations that the state and the government and the school district has itself, a lot of people will say, well, it's my First Amendment right to have freedom of speech. That is true. However, when you go into a school district and when you sign a contract, that kind of changes, especially in the education field. There's a lot of court cases following the First Amendment rights through schools. And essentially it breaks down into two pieces. If you're speaking outside of school grounds about things that you personally feel are okay, then you're talking in a personal manner, which does protect your First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and expression. However, when you're talking in a school and when you're talking about school personnel, etc., such as the initiative, then you're speaking for the staff, and those First Amendment rights necessarily aren't supported. This comes from a court case, which was Bethel School District number 403 versus Frazier, which Frazier gave a speech of a lot of information, and then they disciplined him for the speech, but then he sued the school. And basically, when it went to the courts, the Supreme Court, they had decided that he was speaking more from the school, and so it became more of this is how the school feels versus this is how we feel as a person. So I guess there was just a fine guideline there. So when you're looking at the Constitution, you do have freedom of speech unless the speech affects the harmony of the staff, which this would, whether the speech is detrimental impact on working relationships, which it could, and then the speech is interfering with normal operations of the employer's business. So based on those three things, your freedom of speech and expression actually gets taken away, and you can get written up and have disciplinary acts for this. Based on that, then I went and looked at the school board's policies based on this. And obviously you don't get fired right away, but there will be a write-up process, and furthermore from there. However, I don't think personally I would just go and write up my staff. Especially as a new teacher, a lot of times you don't know a lot that goes on in the school. So for me, I would sit down and I would talk to them, and then I would simply state, if you have a problem with how something's being run, if you don't agree with something, please bring it up during these faculty meetings when we're already discussing the issue and what your concerns are. And if you're not comfortable doing it, please send me an email or come in and talk to me so I can address your concerns, because when you do it in the way that they're doing, it's causing a lot of issues and you could be written up for it. And essentially, after so many write-ups and so many disciplinary actions, you can lose your job. However, for one issue, I don't think you would go to the extremes of firing somebody. However, if the situation escalated, then you could do a write-up process. However, I don't think that would be necessarily needed, depending on the staff that you have. For scenario 3, and the fourth grade teacher, Mr. Duty, organizing these events and the money not being there, there's a great deal of steps, I guess, that would be taken. First and foremost, as the new principal, I've not really been in the school very often. So the first thing I would do would be contacting my superintendent, so we can get started on the investigation process. It was interesting when finding the laws and the articles based on an idea for this. I actually found the Dakota High School teacher accused of stealing the homecoming money and taking it to a casino on Fox 2 News in Detroit with the same sort of information. So the first step that I would take would be contacting the superintendent so that we can start a formal investigation. From there, a lot of times, in this scenario, I don't see a lot of misunderstandings taking place. However, it could, but I don't know. I guess personally, I don't see that happening that way. So I would start an investigation immediately with the superintendent so we can follow the steps and the guidelines found within the state and in the documents. The state regulations that allow me to do this would be in the Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 24, Government State 24-18-104. We are public officials and we're government employees, so we follow like a higher set of standards. And it says a list of things that we cannot do would be like taking money, accepting a gift of substantial value. We cannot have an economic benefit amount to a gift with a loan rate. There's a whole list on that statute of things that we cannot do. So by taking that, then I went into the Pueblo City Schools School Board Code of Conduct, essentially. And the rules of the conduct says that we're not allowed to accept the gifts, we're not allowed to steal, we're not allowed to engage in financial transactions for a staff member who's like being supervised, etc. And so I went on and I used basically the Colorado Revised Statutes to help me in this case. But then after an investigation, obviously, then you get the school board involved, and the teacher would be placed immediately on administrative leave after being asked about the issue upon further investigation, just because you don't want anything else happening and you want the kids and the staff members all to be safe in the school. If it does come back through investigation that this teacher did do it, it was found guilty, law enforcement officials will be called, because then you're being involved in a criminal activity and not just a school sanctioned issue. So those are the steps that I would take. For the last scenario, based on the $30,000 that the IMAT has left, there's a variety of ways that this can be taken on. However, you follow very strict guidelines. The first thing that I would do is the Colorado Department of Education, CDE, does have a whole page based on documents on how to use the money within the schools. They also have a financial policies and procedures handbook and also accounting principles, in which I found a lot of information based on when you have funding, how it needs to be used in a certain way, which in this, since it is academic money and the different academic departments are wanting it, it does meet those guidelines. I would just ask for, itemized to make sure that they're actually meeting the guidelines that are found from the CDE as well as the Board of Education because, as we know, they have their own policies and procedures, such as Code DBD, the determination of budgets, and making sure that we're following all of those processes. But the first thing that I would do would be each group is coming and asking me for money. However, it is not my money and it is not up strictly to me to make this decision. So what I would have each group do is write out what they want the money for, itemize lists and budgets, as well as any other information such as if they're having some safety concerns such as the science department, et cetera, to make sure that we are staying in state compliance. I would want them to create a presentation, as you will, on what if I were to give them however much money they're asking for or a lesser amount, what they would want it to be used for. From there, I would then do some research myself based on what they send us, and I would get my instructional materials allotment team together, my IMAT team, because ultimately, as a group, you're the ones making the decision, not just us. So these presentations and documents that they send me, I would send out to my whole team. So that way everyone can look at it and do their own research based on are we not meeting the safety compliances, etc. From there, we would get together, look over the documents, and as well, the superintendent, even though I'm the designee, they are as an as-needed basis. So my biggest thing is communicating that this is how much we have left, this is what we're going to do, and then ask if he or she would like to sit in, help make these decisions or not, based on, their schedule and availability. From there, then the IMAT team would get together and the groups would come present their information to us, answer any questions or concerns that we may have. And then from there, as an IMAT team, we could vote on how that $30,000 budget is left, with first and foremost making sure that the health and regulations and state requirements for safety are being met. When I read that about the science department, I did get, very interested at first because if they're out of compliance on the safety equipment, that needs done first before we are giving money to FFA or English or even social studies for something that may not be as essential as making sure that we are in safety compliance. But I also am not going to just take somebody's word that they're out of compliance as well with that much money at stake. I would have to be doing my own research as well from there. But anyway, as an IMAT team, we would then vote on what is being used, where money is going, and then we would start following the budgeting process of giving the money and giving the required supplies that they wanted and what we agreed on to each department.